There's something about December that people rarely admit. It's supposed to be the warmest time of the year. And yet, for many, it feels strangely heavy. Not dramatic. Just quietly uncomfortable. Like wearing a smile that doesn't quite fit. Maybe you felt it too. Moments where the noise gets louder but you feel more inward. Where celebrations pile up, but energy runs thin. Where joy feels expected, and that expectation alone becomes exhausting. Most people blame themselves for this feeling. Buddhism never did. Here's where things become quietly unsettling. Buddhism never tried to brighten this season. It never rushed to explain it away or wrap it in meaning. Instead, it paid attention to what happens when light fades, routines slow, and distractions stop working. And what happens isn't failure, it's exposure. When days shorten, the mind loses some of its escape routes. Unresolved patterns surface. Old tensions whisper louder, not because something is wrong, but because something is finally visible. This is the part we're rarely taught. Darkness, in Buddhism, isn't something to overcome. It's something to listen to. Not an enemy. A messenger. And most of us were never shown how to hear what it's saying. In this episode, we're going to explore why Buddhism never needed Christmas, yet understands this season deeply. Why December intensifies attachment, pressure, and quiet suffering. And how Buddhist wisdom offers a way through this time that doesn't demand cheerfulness, only honesty. If this reflection speaks to something you've felt before, you're welcome to stay with this channel. You can like the video, subscribe, or leave a comment if you wish. Sometimes, simply staying present with a question is already the beginning of understanding. Buddhism didn't begin as a belief system asking people to accept invisible truths. It began as an invitation to see, clearly, honestly, without filters. The Buddha didn't ask anyone to worship him or memorize doctrines. He simply said, in essence, look at your mind, look at suffering. That spirit of awakening is the very heart of spiritual enlightenment. At its core, Buddhism speaks directly to the human experience. Stress, restlessness, craving, fear. None of that is new or modern. 2,000 years ago, people felt the same inner turbulence. What Buddhism offered was not salvation, but awareness. And awareness, when practiced, quietly transforms everything. This is why Buddhist wisdom feels surprisingly modern today. It doesn't demand blind faith. It invites investigation. Meditation isn't about escaping reality. It's about sitting still long enough to notice what's already there. Even 5 minutes of mindful breathing can change a day. Many people assume spirituality must look mystical or distant. But Buddhism often starts with something painfully ordinary. Noticing how you react when plans fall apart. Observing how desire tightens the chest during the holidays. That's spiritual practice hiding in plain sight. Buddhism doesn't reject celebration, light, or ritual. It simply asks why we cling to them. This question becomes especially interesting during winter, when ancient traditions and inner silence quietly meet. Winter has always been one of Buddhism's quiet teachers, not through sermons or celebrations, but through observation. Cold slows the body, short days soften ambition, darkness invites stillness. This isn't something to resist. It's impermanence revealing itself in real time. Long before modern calendars, monks observed seasonal cycles closely. The winter solstice wasn't a holiday. It was awareness. The shortest day, the longest night, the pause of the sun. A reminder that decline and return are inseparable. Nothing stays at its peak. Darkness was never dramatized. It isn't evil. It's part of awakening. Just as confusion often precedes clarity, the solstice mirrors the inner path without myth or spectacle. In practical terms, this changes how winter is lived. Rather than forcing productivity, Buddhism encourages alignment, less stimulation, fewer distractions, simpler routines, silent sitting, mindful walking, earlier evenings. Discipline becomes gentleness. What modern culture calls low energy, Buddhism calls wisdom. The body knows when to turn inward. Ignoring that creates suffering, especially in December. Not all suffering comes from darkness. Some comes from resisting it. One of the most striking differences between Buddhism and Western religion is its lack of obsession with sacred dates. No divine birthday, no frozen moment in time. Awakening isn't something that happened once. It can happen again, here, now, in this breath. This wasn't accidental, it was intentional. The Buddha redirected attention away from biography. What mattered wasn't when he was born, but whether suffering could be understood and released. Time was a tool, not a shrine. This allowed Buddhism to move across cultures fluidly. India, China, Tibet, Japan. Dates shifted, practices adapted. Seasonal rituals remained, but none became supreme. Meditation, ethics, and wisdom stayed central. Awakening belonged to attention, not the calendar. In modern life, this is quietly radical. People wait for the right moment to change. Next year, next season, next version of themselves. Buddhism dismantles that delay. Awareness doesn't wait. This reframes December entirely. Instead of asking what the date means, the question becomes what the mind is doing now. And that leads directly to the idea of light, not as event, but as clarity. In Buddhism, light doesn't descend from the sky. It isn't granted by another being. Light appears when confusion loosens its grip. When the mind stops fighting reality, awakening has no spectacle. Buddhist texts treat light carefully. It isn't salvation, it's understanding. Ignorance is darkness, not because it's sinful, but because it obscures what is already present. This contrasts sharply with modern December. Lights everywhere, stimulation amplified. Yet many feel scattered inside. Buddhism would say the issue isn't lack of light, it's excess distraction. Practically, Buddhist light looks ordinary, pausing before reacting, noticing tension before anger, seeing craving without obeying it. These are moments of illumination. The solstice reflects this truth. Light doesn't return dramatically. Days lengthen quietly. Insight grows the same way. Slow, cumulative, honest. Long before Buddhism crossed borders, Asian cultures lived by the sky. They observed the sun for survival, not symbolism. Solstices marked pauses, times for rest. They weren't celebrations of belief. They were acknowledgments of reality. As Buddhism spread through Asia, it encountered solstice rituals tied to agriculture and ancestry. It didn't erase them. It softened them. Focus shifted from appeasing forces to understanding conditions. What Buddhism removed was fixation. Rituals stopped being promises of protection. They became reminders of impermanence. The act mattered less than awareness. Presence replaced superstition. This adaptability became a strength. Nothing was sacred if it increased suffering. If a ritual calmed the mind, it stayed. If it fed fear or craving, it faded. Wisdom replaced obligation. This reframes modern traditions. Rituals aren't the problem. Unconscious repetition is. Buddhism doesn't cancel tradition. It empties it of compulsion. In Buddhist monasteries, winter was never a problem. It was an invitation to slow down. Cold limited movement. Darkness shortened activity. Silence deepened focus. Schedules adjusted naturally. Less travel, more sitting. Less outward duty, more inward clarity. This wasn't withdrawal. It was alignment with conditions. Silence played a central role. Not enforced, but intentional. Speaking less, consuming less, reacting less. The mind settled on its own. Modern life can echo this. December doesn't need to be louder. Reducing social overload, limiting digital noise, protecting evenings, ancient discipline, modern form. This contrasts with holiday culture, endless activity framed as joy, obligation disguised as celebration. Buddhism would ask if it's necessary, and that question reveals suffering. Suffering doesn't come from events, it comes from attachment, especially to how things should feel. December intensifies this. Expectation becomes pressure. Buddhism names this clearly. Craving for pleasure, resistance to discomfort. Both spike during holidays. The image of perfection clashes with reality. The gap becomes pain. Joy isn't criticized. Dependence on it is. When joy is required, it becomes fragile. When peace is conditional, it collapses. Loneliness can appear in crowds. Practically, wisdom suggests lowering expectation, entering gatherings with curiosity, allowing emotions without forcing change, naming discomfort silently. Awareness loosens its grip. Holiday suffering isn't failure, it's predictable attachment. Once seen clearly, resistance drops. The mind stops fighting. Compassion naturally follows. December suffering isn't random. From a Buddhist perspective, suffering always arises from conditions, and December creates very specific ones. The calendar tightens, expectations thicken, memories surface, and suddenly the mind is no longer just living life. It's comparing, rehearsing, and judging it. Buddhism never treated suffering as a personal failure. It treated it as friction between reality and the stories we're carrying. One of the strongest conditions this season creates is pressure to feel something specific. Joy, gratitude, warmth, belonging. And the moment the mind believes it should feel a certain way, tension is already there. In Buddhism, suffering doesn't begin with pain. It begins with resistance. Resisting what is, in favor of what should be. Then comes comparison, quietly slipping in through the side door. Not loud, not obvious, just subtle glances at other lives, other families, other versions of happiness. The mind starts measuring. Am I doing this right? Is my life enough? Buddhism calls this mental measuring a form of craving, not for objects, but for identity. Wanting to be somewhere else, someone else, emotionally speaking. Nostalgia adds another layer. Not memory, nostalgia. Memory simply remembers. Nostalgia longs. It says, things used to be better, and quietly rejects the present moment as inferior. From a Buddhist view, this is attachment disguised as tenderness. For many people, December also brings guilt, a very particular kind. The guilt of not feeling grateful enough, of not being joyful enough, of having everything objectively fine and still feeling empty or tired. Buddhism never equated suffering with ingratitude. It saw it as unmet understanding. Social exhaustion plays its role too. Conversations repeat. Roles solidify. Old dynamics quietly return. You're not just meeting people. You're stepping back into versions of yourself you thought you'd outgrown. Buddhism understood this well. Identity hardens under repetition. And fatigue often isn't physical. It's the weight of performing familiarity. What Buddhism never tried to do was fix these emotions. It didn't say, replace them with better ones. It said, look at the conditions producing them. When pressure, comparison, nostalgia, and guilt converge, suffering isn't surprising. It's logical. And seeing that logic already loosens something. There's an important distinction here. Feeling low in December isn't a spiritual failure. It's often the first honest signal that something is being seen clearly. In Buddhist thought, awareness often arrives before relief. Discomfort isn't the enemy, confusion is. December doesn't invent suffering. It amplifies what's already there. The expectations you carry all year, the identities you maintain, the stories you rarely question when life is moving faster. And this is where the shift begins. Because if a season can amplify inner tension, it can also reveal its structure. And what's revealed isn't the problem. It's the doorway, not to change the season, but to see what the season is quietly showing you. Compassion in Buddhism isn't performed. It arises when defense softens. There's no demand to feel warm on command. True compassion responds. It doesn't perform. Modern holidays turn compassion into duty. Be kind. Be generous. Be grateful. Regardless of capacity. Buddhism would say this isn't compassion. It's pressure. Historically, clarity came first, seeing suffering without guilt. Then compassion arose naturally, not sacrifice, not obligation, presence. This changes generosity, giving by choice, listening without fixing, helping within capacity, resting without apology. Even saying no becomes wisdom. December shifts. Compassion no longer means depletion. It means not abandoning yourself. And when it's real, it becomes sustainable. The Buddha never asked what events meant in themselves. He asked what they revealed in the mind that experienced them. From that perspective, Christmas isn't important because of what it is, but because of what it brings to the surface. The season becomes a mirror long before it becomes a celebration. What shows up in that mirror isn't always comfortable. Expectation, longing, loneliness, the need for things to feel different than they do. Christmas doesn't create these states. It concentrates them, like still water revealing what's already settled at the bottom. Buddhism pays attention to moments like that. Modern culture treats Christmas as something to be managed. Plans, schedules, moods, outcomes. There's an unspoken belief that if everything is arranged correctly, the experience itself will follow. Buddhism sees this impulse clearly, the attempt to control feeling through form. That's where the subtle suffering lives, not in the gathering itself, but in the demand that it mean something, that it heal old wounds, that it compensate for months of distance, that one night carries the weight of an entire year. When a moment becomes an identity, this is who we are, this is what matters. It stops being lived and starts being defended. Buddhism warned against this long ago. Identity, once fixed, becomes fragile, and fragility always produces tension. There's a difference between presence and performance. Presence is simply being there, responsive, open, imperfect. Performance is holding an image of harmony, generosity, closeness, and quietly monitoring whether it's being maintained. Buddhism never asked for performance. It asked for attention. In Buddhist practice, the ordinary is never inferior. Eating, sitting, listening, noticing irritation rise and fall. Nothing needs to be elevated into a sacred event. Meaning doesn't come from intensity. It comes from clarity. And clarity doesn't require special circumstances. Seen this way, Christmas becomes a rare kind of practice field. Not a retreat, not a ritual, not an escape, but daily life, condensed. The same habits, the same reactions, just louder, which makes them easier to see. The teaching here is quiet, but firm. Don't reject the season. Don't cling to it either. Let it move through you as it is. Observation, in Buddhism, is already participation. When nothing needs to be different, something loosens, not because problems vanish, but because the mind stops arguing with the moment. There's no climax in that, just space. And from that space, a question naturally arises. If this season reflects the mind so clearly, what would change if you stopped trying to fix the reflection and simply learned how to look? A Buddhist approach doesn't redesign December. It removes pressure. There's no demand for constant joy. Attention turns to conditions. Wisdom begins with sustainability. Simplification becomes practice. Fewer commitments. One gathering instead of many. Eating slower. Sleeping earlier. Stillness is woven in. Silent sitting. Mindful walking. Lighting a candle without meaning. Ordinary moments anchor awareness. Consumption shifts. Buying less. Giving quietly. No inner debt. Stress dissolves here. December becomes quieter, not empty. Joy may appear or not. Both are allowed. Clarity grows without force. The return of light is never announced. It arrives quietly, not as breakthrough, as settling. Resistance ends. The solstice mirrors this. Light returns slowly. Darkness remains, but weakens. Insight unfolds the same way. Gradual. Honest. This is why patience matters. Forced insight becomes craving. Awakening matures through repetition. Sitting again. Breathing again. Noticing again. December doesn't need to transform you. No dramatic reset is required. Less reactivity is already light. One conscious moment is enough. Presence accumulates. Dates pass. Awareness doesn't. It deepens when resistance drops. and that understanding quietly prepares what comes next. December doesn't ask you to become better. It asks you to become honest. About limits, energy, expectations. Awakening doesn't come from forcing light. It comes from seeing clearly what darkness reveals. What would change if you stopped trying to feel how the season should feel? If quiet wasn't judged? If presence mattered more than performance? You don't need to withdraw. You can remain inwardly free. Give without depletion. Rest without guilt. Say no without explanation. Choose one moment each day to slow down. No phone, no fixing, just noticing. Clarity often arrives as relief. If this resonated, stay here. Subscribe and turn on notifications to continue exploring Buddhist wisdom, spiritual awakening, and ancient insight for modern life. The path doesn't need noise to be real.